Hey there. Before anything begins, you allow yourself to slow down. Wherever you are right now, you take a quiet moment to arrive. The day behind you loosens its grip, and the world grows a little softer. You're not in a hurry here. There's nothing you need to do, nothing you need to solve. This is simply a place to rest, to listen, and to drift gently through time. If you feel like it, you can leave a small trace of yourself behind. In the comments below, you might share the name of your city and the time it is for you right now, as if placing a small marker on the map before settling in. Others are doing the same, scattered across the world, each of you listening under a different sky, yet all arriving at the same quiet moment together. Now, as your breathing slows, you let the sounds around you fade into the background. Your attention drifts away from the present and begins to move somewhere much older. You awaken beside a sea that barely moves, as if it, too, is half asleep. The water is dark and glassy, reflecting only fragments of the night sky, broken gently by the slow breath of the tide. Cool air rests against your skin, carrying the faint scent of salt and damp wood. Somewhere nearby, a small fire crackles low, not enough to disturb the quiet, only enough to soften it. You are standing on a narrow stretch of shoreline, where land and water have known each other for so long that neither seems fully separate from the other. Behind you, the land rises gradually. Low hills are dotted with shadowy shapes of trees, their outlines barely visible against the dim horizon. Cedars grow here, tall and steady, their presence felt even in darkness. You sense them more than you see them, their resinous scent mixing with the smell of the sea. These trees have stood through countless seasons, their trunks thick with time, their branches shaped by a wind that never rushes, only returns again and again. The people who live along this coast know these trees well. They cut them carefully, respectfully, aware that they will become something more than wood. The town nearby does not announce itself. There are no walls rising dramatically, no towers reaching for the sky. Instead, small stone structures rest close together, as if leaning inward for warmth. Their surfaces are cool and rough, built from what the land easily gives. Narrow paths wind between them, worn smooth by bare feet and simple sandals. Even now, in the quiet before dawn, the town feels awake in a subtle way, like a person breathing slowly in sleep. You walk along the edge of the shore, where damp sand presses gently beneath your steps. Each footprint fills slowly with dark water before fading away. The sound of the sea is soft, rhythmic, unhurried. It is not the crashing roar of distant storms, but a patient whisper, a sound that has shaped lives here without ever demanding attention. The people of this coast have learned its language without thinking about it. They know when it will provide and when it must be respected from a distance. Small boats rest nearby, pulled just far enough onto the sand to avoid the tide. Their wooden hulls are smooth from years of use, patched and repaired many times over. You can feel the grain of the wood beneath your fingers, worn down by ropes, hands, and salt water. These boats are not impressive in size, but they are trusted. They carry people out into the open water and bring them back again, day after day, season after season. They are as familiar as breathing. As the sky begins to pale, a faint line of grey forming where darkness once held firm, the town stirs almost imperceptibly. A door opens somewhere, its wooden hinge sighing softly. Footsteps pass along stone, unhurried and light. The smell of grain and warm ash drifts through the air as someone tends a hearth that never fully went cold. There is no sudden beginning to the day here. Morning arrives the way the tide does, slowly, without announcement. You move through the town as if you belong there, unnoticed and unremarkable. Inside one of the homes, you glimpse a simple interior, clay vessels lined along a wall, woven baskets holding dried goods, tools resting where they were last used. Everything has a place, not because of order for its own sake, but because daily life depends on knowing where things are when they are needed. The walls hold onto the cool of the night, and the floor beneath your feet feels solid and grounding. These people do not speak of themselves as part of something grand. There is no name yet that gathers them into a single story. They are families, neighbors, sailors, builders, traders in the most modest sense. They know the coastline by memory, every inlet and rocky outcrop, every place where the water deepens or the fish gather. Their knowledge is carried in routine rather than words, passed quietly from one generation to the next through watching and doing. You sense how deeply time is woven into this place, not measured in years or records, but in repetition. Nets are mended in the same way they always have been. Boats are launched with the same gestures, the same quiet focus. Children learn to balance on stone and sand without being taught, simply by growing up here. Even the pauses between tasks feel familiar, shaped by centuries of unbroken habit. Further inland, the land rises into gentle hills where fields are tended with patience. The soil is thin in places, stubborn, but the people understand it. They work with it rather than against it, accepting modest harvests without complaint. Olive trees grow slowly, their twisted trunks bearing witness to decades of care. Vines stretch along low supports, their leaves dark even in the dim light. Nothing here is rushed. Growth is expected to take time. As daylight strengthens, the sea shifts color, moving from black to deep blue, then soft gray. Birds begin to call from the rocks, their cries brief and distant. Fishermen prepare their boats, checking lines and nets with practiced hands. There is no urgency, only readiness. The sea will be there whether they hurry or not. They have learned that patience brings more than force ever could. You notice how sound behaves here. Voices stay low, conversations brief and functional. Words are used carefully, saved for what matters. Silence is not uncomfortable. It is a shared understanding. Even when people work together, much of it is done without speaking, each person knowing their role instinctively. The rhythm of life feels steady, almost lulling, as if designed to slow the heartbeat. In this place, long before written marks are pressed into clay or inked onto skin, memory lives in motion, in the way a sail is folded, in the way a knot is tied, in the way a child watches an elder without realizing they are learning something that will last a lifetime. The absence of records does not mean the absence of knowledge. Everything important is carried in the body, in hands that know what to do without being told. As the sun finally lifts above the horizon, its light spreads gently across stone and water. It does not dazzle or demand attention. It simply reveals what was already there. The sea glimmers softly. The town settles into its waking rhythm, and you remain quietly present, standing at the edge of a story that has not yet learned to speak its own name, shaped by tides, cedar trees, and starlight, waiting patiently for the world to notice. You drift inward from the shoreline without noticing the moment it becomes a street. Sand gives way to packed earth, earth to stone, and soon the ground beneath your feet cools and hardens, holding the night the way a shaded wall holds the last trace of evening. The air changes subtly here. Salt still lingers, but now it is joined by smoke from low fires, by the faint mineral scent of stone that has absorbed centuries of sun and rain. Dawn moves slowly through the narrow streets, not flooding them with light, but slipping between buildings in thin, patient ribbons, touching doorways and corners before retreating again. The city does not rise dramatically around you. It gathers. Stone walls press close on either side, built from blocks cut and fitted with care, rather than grandeur. Their surfaces are uneven beneath your fingertips, shaped by hand and weather, carrying the marks of tools long worn smooth. These walls remember heat, holding the warmth of yesterday and releasing it only gradually into the cool morning air. As you walk, your footsteps echo softly, not sharp or hollow, but muted, as if the city itself prefers quiet company. Paths curve gently rather than running straight, shaped by habit more than design. You notice how each turn seems to reveal something useful rather than impressive. A well set slightly back from the street, its stone rim darkened by countless hands. A shallow alcove where baskets rest, waiting to be filled. A low doorway opening into a space that smells of grain and clay. The city feels lived in, not planned. It has grown the way a shoreline does, responding to need, to convenience, to the small decisions made every day by people who expected to be here tomorrow. As the light strengthens, shutters open without ceremony. A cloth is hung across a doorway to catch the breeze. Someone sweeps dust toward the street, not to remove it entirely, but to guide it where it belongs. Voices begin to surface, low and unhurried, exchanging simple observations about the day ahead. There is no rush to begin. Work has always waited for the light, and the light always arrives when it is ready. You pass beneath a stone arch, worn smooth at shoulder height, its curve shaped by generations brushing past with baskets, tools, and bundled goods. Above you, flat rooftops stretch toward the pale sky, some already occupied. A figure kneels near the edge of one roof, laying out cloth to air, the fabric shifting gently as the breeze moves inland from the sea. From another roof, the sound of grain being poured into a shallow tray drifts down, steady and calming, like rain that never quite falls. The city breathes through these rooftops and streets together. Warm air rises slowly as fires are fed and ovens come back to life. The smell of baking bread begins to spread, subtle at first, then more certain, settling into the spaces between buildings. It mixes with the scent of fish, carried in from the harbor, of resin from stored timber, of oil warmed just enough to flow. These are not fleeting smells. They linger, layering themselves into memory, becoming part of how the city recognizes itself. You move deeper, where streets narrow further and the light dims again. Here, workshops are already awake. A potter turns a wheel with a foot that knows the rhythm without thought. Clay rests cool and heavy between steady hands, rising into shape as water glides across its surface. Nearby, a weaver checks a loom, fingers brushing threads into alignment. The soft knock of wood against wood repeats at a measured pace, neither hurried nor slow. Each sound fits neatly into the larger quiet, never overpowering it. Stone courtyards open unexpectedly between buildings, their centers worn smooth by countless feet. In one, jars are arranged in careful rows, their rounded sides catching the light. They hold oil, wine, grain, each sealed and marked in ways understood without words. In another, a small shrine rests against a wall, unadorned, its presence acknowledged more through habit than attention. Someone pauses briefly before passing, a hand touching stone, a breath taken, then life continues. Children appear gradually, not released all at once, but emerging alongside the morning. They sit on thresholds, tracing patterns in dust, watching adults work with quiet focus. No one directs them, yet they learn all the same, absorbing movements and rhythms that will one day feel as natural as walking. The city teaches without instruction, offering lessons through repetition and proximity rather than explanation. As the sun rises higher, light finally reaches the deeper streets, revealing details previously held in shadow. Marks etched into stone where measures were once taken. Grooves in the pavement where carts have passed so often they no longer need guidance. You sense how the city remembers every interaction, every exchange, every small adjustment made to keep life flowing smoothly. Nothing here is wasted, not even space. Each corner serves a purpose, even if that purpose is simply to rest. The harbor lies just beyond the last line of buildings, and its presence is felt everywhere. Ropes are coiled neatly beside doorways. Nets hang from walls to dry, their shadows patterned against stone. Crates are stacked in anticipation rather than urgency. Goods arrive and depart as part of a steady pulse, not a spectacle. The city has learned how to welcome movement without letting it disrupt the calm of daily life. You notice how people navigate these streets with ease, turning without hesitation, stepping aside without breaking stride. They carry loads balanced perfectly against their bodies, adjusting weight with a shift of the hip or shoulder. Their movements are efficient, born of familiarity rather than speed. Even when paths cross, there is no collision, only a brief narrowing and widening, like water finding its way around stone. Above it all, the sky remains wide and pale, framed by rooftops and the occasional glimpse of sea. Gulls circle lazily, their calls softened by distance. The breeze moves through the city in gentle currents, cooling stone, lifting cloth, carrying voices just far enough to be heard and no farther. You feel held within this place, not enclosed, but gathered, part of a living pattern that repeats itself day after day without growing dull. By the time the sun is fully present, the city has settled into its rhythm. Work continues, conversations ebb and flow, and the streets maintain their quiet purpose. Nothing here feels monumental, yet everything feels enduring. Stone and salt air combine to shape a way of life that does not seek attention, content to exist, to function, to breathe steadily as it always has. And as you walk onward through these narrow streets, you sense how naturally the city carries you forward, deeper into its long, unbroken story. You settle into the quieter heart of the city, where sound seems to soften on its own, where even footsteps lower their voices as they pass. The stone beneath you is cool and smooth, worn flat by years of careful movement. Light enters this space gently, filtered through cloth and narrow openings, never harsh, never demanding attention. The air smells faintly of clay and oil, of dust warmed just enough to be comforting. You sit where others have sat before, close enough to observe, far enough not to interrupt, and you sense that what happens here does not need witnesses to matter. Nearby, hands move with an unhurried confidence. A small slab of clay rests on a low table, its surface damp and pliable. Fingers press into it slowly, shaping marks that are neither pictures nor decorations, but something quieter and more deliberate. Each symbol is simple, composed of lines and angles that feel purposeful rather than ornamental. You watch as one mark follows another, evenly spaced, each given room to exist without crowding the next. There is no flourish here, no excess. The beauty lies in restraint, in how little is needed to be understood. Voices drift through the room, low and calm, discussing everyday matters rather than grand ideas. Someone speaks of a shipment that will arrive with the afternoon tide. Another mentions a measure of grain, a length of cloth. As they talk, the marks in the clay begin to hold those words, fixing them gently in place. You feel the subtle shift as sound becomes something more permanent, something that can wait patiently without fading. The spoken word no longer has to carry the full weight of memory on its own. A reed pen is dipped into dark ink, lifted carefully to avoid dripping, then drawn across a sheet laid flat on the table. The surface is smooth, prepared, receptive. The pen moves lightly, almost gliding, leaving behind the same shapes you saw pressed into clay, now thinner, more fluid. Ink settles into fibers, dark and steady. The act feels intimate, quiet, as though language itself has learned to move more softly, to take up less space, to ask less effort from the hand and the mind. You notice how different this feels from older forms of marking, from images carved deep into stone or painted boldly onto walls. These symbols do not demand strength to create or space to display. They can be made quickly, shared easily, carried without strain. A small tablet can hold a message that once required a long explanation. A narrow strip of parchment can travel farther than a voice ever could, crossing water, surviving time, waiting patiently to be read. Around you, learning happens without ceremony. A younger pair of hands watches closely, mimicking the motion of the pen in the air before touching ink. No one corrects them harshly. Mistakes are allowed to settle, to be seen and understood. The shapes are forgiving. They do not change with tone or mood. They ask only to be recognized, not interpreted. You sense how this simplicity is not accidental, but carefully chosen, shaped by people who spend their lives moving between places, exchanging goods, ideas, and trust. The room holds a particular stillness now, not silence, but a focused calm. Even breathing seems slower here. You feel how language is becoming something that belongs not just to those who speak it fluently, but to those who use it practically. Traders, sailors, artisans. People who need clarity more than poetry. These symbols do not tell stories by themselves. They record, they list, they name. And in doing so, they free the mind to wander elsewhere, to think, to plan, to rest. A finished tablet is lifted gently, set aside to dry. Its surface catches the light briefly before dulling again, content to exist without attention. You imagine it being carried out into the street, passed from hand to hand, read by someone who was not present when it was made. The thought feels expansive and calming at the same time. Distance shrinks quietly. Time loosens its grip. A message no longer belongs entirely to the moment of its creation. As ink dries and clay firms, the voices around you soften further, turning practical matters into murmurs. The work continues without urgency. There is no sense that something revolutionary is happening. No pause to admire the outcome. This is simply another tool taking its place among many others, as ordinary and as essential as rope or timber. Yet you feel the depth of it, the way these small marks will slip into daily life and never fully leave. Outside, the city continues its steady rhythm. Goods move through streets, ships prepare to depart, the sea breathes against stone. Inside this quiet space, language learns to travel alongside them. It becomes lighter, easier to carry, shaped for motion rather than monument. You remain seated, watching, listening, aware that these soft voices and simple symbols are weaving something lasting, something that will move gently through the world, asking very little, offering much, and never needing to raise its voice to be heard. You remain where the streets narrow and the noise of the harbor softens into something more controlled, more thoughtful. Stone still surrounds you, but here it feels less heavy, less concerned with holding things up, and more focused on holding things still. The air is cooler in this place, touched by shadow and filtered light. It smells faintly of damp clay, of oil kept in small containers, of fibers dried and prepared with care. You sit low, close to the ground, where movement slows naturally, where no one needs to speak loudly to be heard. In front of you, a small work surface waits, its edges rounded by years of use. A lump of clay rests there, dark and smooth, yielding slightly under gentle pressure. Hands approach it without haste. Fingers press into its surface with quiet intention, leaving behind narrow impressions that feel deliberate and restrained. The marks are not pictures. They do not attempt to resemble birds, people, or waves. Instead, they reduce sound itself into shape, breaking speech down into its simplest parts. Each symbol stands calmly beside the next, patient and unadorned, as if it knows it will be understood without explanation. The room holds a low murmur of voices, but they do not compete with one another. Someone speaks while another listens, their attention drifting easily between sound and symbol. A word is spoken once, then echoed by the movement of a hand. The clay receives it without resistance, accepting meaning the way sand accepts water. You feel how this changes the weight of speech. Words no longer vanish the moment they are released. They settle. They remain. Nearby, a shallow bowl holds ink, dark and glossy, its surface trembling slightly when the table shifts. A reed pen is lifted and dipped, excess ink wiped carefully along the rim. When it touches the parchment, the sound is barely audible, a faint whisper as the tip glides across the surface. The same symbols appear again, thinner now, more fluid, their lines confident and restrained. Ink sinks into the fibers and stays there, drying slowly, becoming part of the material itself. You notice how small the space needs to be for this work to happen. There is no need for open courtyards or large walls. Language has learned to fold itself inward, to occupy less room. A message that once required memory, repetition, and presence can now be held in the palm of a hand. It can be set aside. It can be carried. It can wait. This realization does not arrive suddenly. It settles gradually, like dusk, felt more than noticed. A bundle of finished tablets rests nearby, stacked carefully, their surfaces already firming. They are light enough to be lifted easily, yet you sense the quiet importance they hold. Measures recorded, names noted, agreements remembered without argument. These are not grand declarations meant for temples or monuments. They belong to daily life, to exchange and coordination, to trust made durable through clarity. The symbols do not exaggerate. They simply state. The people around you move with familiarity, not reverence. No one pauses to admire the writing for its own sake. It is treated as a useful thing, like rope or timber or oil. Yet there is a gentleness in the way it is handled. Tablets are not stacked carelessly. Parchment is smoothed before use, weighted at the corners so it does not curl. Even ink is conserved, stirred slowly, replenished when needed. You sense that care does not come from fear of scarcity alone, but from an understanding that precision matters. A younger figure sits close by, watching intently. Their hands trace the shapes in the air before touching any surface, memorizing movement before committing it to material. No one instructs them directly. Learning happens through proximity, through repetition, through quiet observation. The symbols are forgiving, simple enough to be remembered, flexible enough to be shared. They do not belong to one person. They are meant to move between many. Outside, the city continues its steady pulse. You can hear it faintly through the stone, through narrow openings, where light and sound pass in thin streams. Footsteps cross courtyards. A voice calls briefly from a distance. Somewhere, wood knocks against wood as a crate is shifted. Inside this room, none of that feels distant. The writing does not separate itself from life. It records it gently, without interruption. You imagine these symbols leaving the city, carried alongside goods packed into ships. A tablet wrapped in cloth. a strip of parchment folded carefully. They will cross water, arrive in places where accents differ, where customs shift subtly, yet the symbols will remain unchanged, steady and recognizable. They ask little of the reader. They do not demand performance or memory. They offer understanding quietly, efficiently, without ceremony. As time passes, the light in the room shifts, moving slowly across the work surface. Shadows stretch, then soften. Ink dries completely. Clay hardens enough to be lifted. One by one, finished pieces are gathered, tied, set aside. There is no sense of completion, no final gesture. The work pauses naturally, ready to resume whenever needed. Language has found a rhythm that matches the pace of the city itself. You remain seated a while longer, feeling how this quiet innovation settles into place without disruption. Nothing has been overturned. No old ways have been rejected. Instead, something new has slipped gently alongside what already exists. Light enough not to burden, simple enough to endure. Voices will continue to speak. Stories will continue to be told. But now, words can travel farther than breath, rest longer than memory, and move through the world as calmly as the people who first shaped them. Eventually, you rise and step back into the narrow street, carrying with you the sense of something subtle but lasting. The stone beneath your feet feels the same. The air still smells of salt and smoke. Life moves on without pause, yet threaded quietly through it all is this new softness, this way of letting meaning travel without strain. And as you move forward with the city around you, you feel how these simple symbols have already begun to follow, settling naturally into the long, unbroken flow of Phoenician life. You move without noticing when the ground beneath you changes again, stone giving way to wood, the steady firmness of the city replaced by a surface that responds to every shift of your weight. The deck rises and falls gently, not enough to unbalance you, only enough to remind you that nothing here is fixed. The scent of the city fades behind you, replaced by pitch, salt, and sun-warmed timber. Ropes lie coiled nearby, their fibers rough beneath your fingers, each strand darkened by years of handling and spray. The sea presses softly against the hull, a quiet, repeating sound that feels less like noise and more like breathing. The ship does not feel large, yet it feels capable. Its planks are fitted closely, their seams sealed with care rather than excess. You sense how every part has been shaped with purpose, nothing added without reason, nothing left to chance. The mast rises above you, steady and patient, its sail folded neatly for now, waiting for the right moment rather than demanding movement. This vessel does not hurry. It understands that the water will carry it when the time is right. Around you, sailors move with an ease that comes only from repetition. Their steps are sure, their gestures economical. A hand checks a knot without looking. Another adjusts a line, feeling tension rather than measuring it. Voices are low, exchanged only when needed, never raised against the wind. There is no sense of command shouted across the deck, no urgency to impress. Everything here depends on listening, on watching, on responding calmly to what the sea offers. As the shoreline begins to loosen its hold, the city recedes without drama. Stone walls shrink into pale shapes, rooftops flatten into lines, then soften further until they become part of the land itself. You feel no sharp separation, only a gradual widening of space. The water darkens as depth increases, shifting in color beneath the hull. The sound changes too, becoming deeper, more rhythmic, less interrupted by shore. The ship settles into this new balance, as if it has always belonged here. You look upward as daylight thins, watching the sky prepare itself for night. The sun lowers slowly, its warmth fading without complaint. Colors deepen, blues turning heavier, shadows stretching across the deck. The sailors adjust the sail, allowing the wind to take hold gently, not pulling against it, but accepting its direction. The ship responds with a subtle change in motion, a smoother glide, as if relieved to let go of effort. When darkness arrives, it does so gradually, layer by layer. The first stars appear faintly, barely noticeable at first, then growing clearer as the sky empties itself of light. The deck cools beneath your feet. The air sharpens, carrying the scent of open water, clean and endless. Somewhere, a lantern is lit, its glow soft and contained, careful not to compete with the night above. You watch as eyes lift towards the sky, not in wonder, but in recognition. Patterns emerge where others see randomness. Lines connect distant points of light, forming shapes that feel as familiar as streets back home. These constellations are not decorations. They are markers, guides carried not on parchment or clay, but in memory and practice. Each star holds a place in a quiet map, one that moves slowly overhead yet remains reliable. A sailor points briefly, tracing a line between lights with a finger, then lowers their hand. No explanation is needed. The ship adjusts its course slightly, responding to that silent understanding. You feel how trust operates here, not as blind faith, but as accumulated experience. The stars have been watched from these decks for generations. Their paths are known, their changes expected. Even when clouds pass, even when the sky darkens fully, the knowledge remains. The sea stretches in all directions now, a vast surface shifting under moonlight. Waves rise and fall in steady patterns, never abrupt, never chaotic. The hull moves with them, creaking softly, reminding you that wood and water are in constant conversation. You sense how this movement, once unsettling, has become comforting to those who belong here. It rocks thought into stillness, smoothing edges, encouraging patience. Time feels different on the water. There are no landmarks to measure progress, no walls to mark shadow. The night unfolds slowly, and with it, the hours lose their sharpness. Tasks are performed when needed, then released. Someone checks the sail, then rests. Another watches the horizon, eyes adjusting to darkness, noticing subtle changes in wind and wave. Nothing is rushed. Everything is attended to. You lean against the rail, feeling the coolness of damp wood against your palms. Below, the water glimmers faintly, reflecting fragments of starlight before breaking them apart again. You think of the messages pressed into clay and inked onto parchment, now tucked safely among cargo, traveling quietly alongside you. Words and goods share the same journey, moving across distances that once seemed impossible, carried by patience rather than force. The sailors speak occasionally, their voices blending with the sounds of the ship. They speak of wind direction, of weather remembered, of coasts known by feel rather than sight. There is no bravado in their tone. The sea does not reward arrogance. It responds to attention, to restraint, to those willing to wait. You feel how this understanding has shaped not only their journeys, but their lives on land as well. As the night deepens, the ship becomes a small, steady world of its own. The lantern's glow shifts with the motion, casting slow-moving shadows across faces and ropes. The stars wheel overhead, silent and constant. You feel held between sky and water, carried forward without struggle. This is movement without conquest, travel without spectacle. The ship does not announce itself to the sea. It listens, adjusts, and continues. Eventually, fatigue settles gently into your body. Not heavy, not urgent. You find a place to sit, then to rest. The deck warm enough from the day to be comforting. The rocking motion steadies your breath. Above you, the stars continue their quiet work, guiding without demanding recognition. Below you, the sea supports the hull without complaint. In this space, suspended between departure and arrival, you understand how these ships have shaped a way of being as much as a way of traveling. They teach patience, observation, humility. They carry not just cargo and people, but habits of thought, rhythms of life. And as the vessel moves onward through the dark, trusting stars that have never failed it, you move with it, part of a long, calm passage that stretches far beyond the horizon. The ship eventually eases its way back toward land, not with a sudden arrival, but with a gradual closeness that you feel before you see. The motion beneath your feet softens, the water growing shallower, the rhythm changing in small, familiar ways. When you step onto the shore again, the ground feels steady, but not rigid, as if it remembers the sea and has learned to yield just enough. The air here is different from the open water. It is heavier, layered with smells that settle rather than drift. Salt remains, but now it is joined by something sharper, something faintly bitter, carried on the breeze from low stone buildings near the edge of the city. You follow that scent without effort, drawn toward a place where work unfolds slowly and deliberately. The ground is damp, darkened by years of rinsing and runoff. Shallow basins sit in the open air, their rims smoothed by constant use. Piles of small shells gather nearby, pale and unassuming, their surfaces dulled by sun and handling. At first glance, nothing here suggests value or luxury. It feels quiet, almost forgotten, like a place that prefers not to be noticed. Hands move steadily in front of you, never rushing, never stopping completely. Shells are crushed with measured pressure, not forceful enough to scatter fragments, not gentle enough to leave them whole. The sound is soft and repetitive, a muted grinding that blends easily into the background. No one speaks while this is done. Words would not help. The work depends on attention rather than instruction, on knowing when to press and when to pause. The crushed shells are gathered carefully, placed into small containers where they will sit and change. You notice how time behaves differently here. Nothing happens quickly, and nothing is expected to. The mixture must rest. It must be exposed to air, then shaded, then watched. The scent grows stronger as moments pass, sharp and almost unpleasant, clinging to cloth and skin. It is not a fragrance meant to please. It is endured, accepted as part of the process. Nearby, lengths of plain fabric are rinsed in water drawn from the sea. The cloth is light in color, unremarkable, woven tightly, but without decoration. Hands lift it slowly, allowing water to drain back into the basin, then lower it again, repeating the motion with calm precision. Each rinse removes something unseen, preparing the fibers to receive what will come later. The rhythm is soothing in its predictability, the same movements repeated again and again without boredom. When the time is right, the cloth is submerged into the prepared mixture. At first, nothing seems to happen. The fabric darkens slightly, taking on a muted tone that could easily be overlooked. It is lifted, exposed to air, then lowered again. With each cycle, the color deepens almost imperceptibly, shifting through shades that feel uncertain, unfinished. You sense the patience required here, the willingness to trust a process that reveals itself only gradually. The people working here watch closely, their eyes trained to notice subtle changes that would escape casual attention. They do not measure time with tools. They measure it with experience, with smell, with color seen in shifting light. The cloth is never left unattended, never rushed through its stages. Silence returns often, broken only by the splash of water and the soft rustle of fabric being handled. As the color finally settles, deepening into something rich and unmistakable, the work does not end. The cloth is rinsed again and again, washed free of residue, allowed to breathe. Each step fixes the color more firmly into the fibers, ensuring it will not fade easily, that it will endure handling, travel, wear. You realize that what makes this fabric rare is not just the source of the dye, but the time invested in it. Waiting has been woven into it as surely as the threads themselves. The finished cloth is laid out carefully, catching the light in a way that feels almost restrained. The color does not shout. It absorbs. It holds depth, changing subtly depending on shadow and sun. You understand why it is prized, why it carries meaning beyond appearance. It represents hours spent attending rather than producing, watching rather than forcing. It is the result of repetition accepted without frustration. Around you, the city continues its quiet flow. Ships will carry this cloth away, folded and protected. Its value understood long before it is seen. Those who wear it may never know the smell that lingered here, the silence that surrounded its making, the patience required to bring the color into being. Yet all of that remains within it, held invisibly, traveling wherever the fabric goes. You remain a while longer, observing the steady pace, the unbroken focus. No one here hurries to finish. The work ends only when it is ready to. As you step away, the scent follows briefly, then fades, leaving behind the sense of something carefully made, shaped by time rather than urgency. The city receives the finished cloth without celebration, accepting it as another quiet contribution to a way of life built on attention, restraint, and the art of waiting. You leave the sharp scent of dye behind without effort, and it fades as naturally as it arrived, replaced by warmer, more familiar smells that gather where people meet without walls between them. The ground beneath your feet becomes smoother again, worn by countless steps taken in no particular hurry. Voices thicken the air here, not loud, not urgent, but layered and constant, rising and falling like shallow water over stone. You drift forward, carried by the gentle pull of movement, and find yourself among tables, baskets, awnings, and open hands. The marketplace does not announce itself as a center of importance. It simply exists where paths intersect and people naturally slow. Canvas stretched overhead softens the light, turning the sun into something diffused and kind. Shadows move lazily across piles of goods, laid out with quiet confidence. Jars of oil catch a muted glow. Bundles of dyed cloth rest folded, their deep color absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Crates of glassware, metal tools, timber pieces, and dried food sit close enough to touch, far enough to be seen. Nothing is displayed to overwhelm. Everything is placed to be understood. You move between familiar faces, though none of them look directly at you for long. Recognition here is subtle, built over years rather than moments. A nod replaces a greeting. A pause in conversation acknowledges presence. Hands extend and withdraw with ease, offering goods not as challenges, but as invitations. Bargaining happens in low tones, almost conversational, more about mutual comfort than advantage. Numbers are spoken quietly. Agreements settle without performance. There is no tension in these exchanges. No guards stand watch. No raised voices cut through the air. Disagreements, when they appear, soften quickly, eased by memory rather than authority. Someone recalls a past delivery that arrived intact. Another remembers a season when payment was delayed but never forgotten. Trust here is not blind. It is layered, reinforced by repetition, by reliability tested slowly over time. Each transaction carries the weight of many before it and the promise of many yet to come. You notice how often hands pause mid-gesture, allowing the other person space to respond. Goods are handled carefully, not just out of respect for their value, but for what they represent. A length of cloth is unfolded fully, then refolded with the same attention. A jar is opened briefly, its contents examined, then sealed again without rush. These moments stretch comfortably, as if time itself has learned to accommodate patience. Around you, languages overlap softly. Accents shift. Some words sound familiar, others slightly altered, shaped by distance and travel. Yet meaning moves easily between them, carried by gesture, by shared understanding, by the quiet presence of written marks tucked into belts or baskets. A small tablet changes hands, glanced at quickly, then returned. No ceremony surrounds it. Its purpose is practical, its authority accepted without question. The symbols pressed into it speak clearly enough on their own. Children weave through the crowd, unnoticed yet fully present. They carry small items, deliver messages, observe everything. They learn not by instruction, but by immersion. They see how an exchange begins and ends, how hands part after agreement, how a promise is made without being spoken aloud. These lessons settle into them naturally, shaping how they will move through these same spaces years from now. The goods here come from many places, but none feel foreign. Wood from inland hills rests beside metals shaped elsewhere. Glass reflects light differently depending on where it was made, yet it all serves the same quiet purpose. Even the sea seems present, lingering in the salt-stained edges of crates and the texture of rope. Movement is implied everywhere, but nothing feels unsettled. Arrival and departure are simply part of the same ongoing rhythm. You sense how different this feels from markets driven by force or fear. No one here takes more than can be carried. No one demands attention. Power does not announce itself through size or threat, but through consistency. The strongest presence belongs to those who return again and again, who deliver what they promise, who listen as carefully as they speak. Influence grows slowly here, like color deepening in cloth, fixed not by conquest, but by time. As the day advances, the marketplace shifts without breaking. Some tables empty and are folded away. Others appear in their place. Conversations conclude, and new ones begin seamlessly. Goods gathered earlier are now bundled, secured, ready to travel outward again. You watch as a familiar piece of dyed fabric is wrapped carefully and placed into a container already marked for shipment. It will leave quietly, without ceremony, carried along routes shaped by generations of careful exchange. You remain among the murmurs, feeling how this way of trade shapes everything it touches. Cities grow without walls pressing outward. Ships travel without banners raised. Influence spreads without erasing what it meets. What moves through these hands is not just material, but habit, expectation, restraint. Each exchange reinforces the idea that reaching outward does not require taking over, that connection can be built without breaking what already exists. Eventually, the crowd thins, the sounds soften. The ground beneath your feet cools again as shadows lengthen. You drift onward, carrying with you the calm certainty that this quiet commerce, conducted without force, has carried these people farther than armies ever could. And as the marketplace settles into evening, its work complete without fanfare, you feel how naturally it folds back into the steady life of the city, another thread woven into a long, unbroken pattern of movement and trust. The movement outward feels gentle, almost inevitable, as if the paths traced by goods and quiet agreements naturally extend beyond the familiar coastline. The sea carries you again, but this time the distance feels less uncertain. When land reappears on the horizon, it does not arrive as a surprise. It comes slowly into focus, low and pale beneath a wide sky, its shape softened by haze. The water changes color as the ship approaches, shifting from deep blue to green, then lighter still, revealing a seabed that seems to rise to meet you. The hull slows, responding to shallower depth, and the sound of water against wood becomes softer. more contained. You step ashore onto stone that is not your own, yet your body adjusts without hesitation. The harbor unfolds with a quiet familiarity that settles into you almost immediately. The arrangement of boats feels known, even if the shoreline curves differently. Ropes are tied in the same careful way. Wooden beams show the same scars from years of docking and departure. The smell of salt mixes with smoke from small fires burning close to the water, just as it does at home. Voices carry across the harbor in rhythms that differ slightly in sound but not in intention. You sense how quickly the unfamiliar becomes ordinary when routine is allowed to lead. Ships are drawn up for inspection and repair, their hulls examined with practiced eyes. Hands run along planks, feeling for weaknesses rather than looking for them. A loose fastening is tightened, a worn edge is smoothed, pitch is warmed and pressed into seams, its scent rising into the air, thick and reassuring. These tasks are performed without ceremony, as if the ship itself knows what is required and guides the work. Tools move from hand to hand, used briefly, then return to their place. Nothing is wasted. Nothing is rushed. Nearby, food is prepared in the same simple manner you have come to expect. Fish is cleaned and laid out to dry. Grain is ground steadily, the sound of stone against stone creating a low, even rhythm. Oil is poured carefully, measured by sight and experience rather than marks. Meals are not elaborate, but they are reliable, warm, and shared without distinction. People gather in small groups, sitting close enough to feel the presence of one another without needing conversation to fill the space. Eating here feels less like a pause and more like a continuation of work, another necessary motion in the flow of the day. As daylight shifts, the harbor settles into its afternoon calm. Goods are unloaded and stacked neatly, their placement decided by habit rather than instruction. Containers marked with familiar symbols are set aside, their contents understood without being opened. A brief exchange of words confirms what will move onward and what will remain. No raised voices accompany these decisions. Trust, once established, travels easily across water, carried by reputation rather than force. You walk beyond the immediate edge of the harbor, noticing how the land rises and opens into a settlement that mirrors the one you left behind, though shaped by different materials and light. Stone may be lighter here, sand mixed into its surface. Wood may be darker, weathered by a harsher sun. Yet the spaces feel arranged for the same purposes. Narrow streets guide movement inward. Small courtyards offer rest. Low walls create shelter without closing off the sky. You feel no need to learn these paths consciously. Your feet find their way naturally. Evening approaches without urgency. The sky deepens in color, and shadows lengthen across stone and sand. Fires are lit again, their glow steady and contained. The air cools, carrying scents of cooking and seaweed, of resin and smoke. People gather as they always do, some mending nets, others checking cargo one last time. Stories may be exchanged quietly, but often silence prevails, comfortable and unbroken. The routines repeat themselves so faithfully that the distance traveled begins to feel less significant than the continuity maintained. Under a foreign sky, Stars appear that differ slightly in arrangement, yet they feel no less dependable. Eyes lift instinctively, tracing patterns that guide both rest and movement. You notice how quickly these points of light are accepted, folded into memory alongside the familiar ones. The night does not feel strange here. It feels accommodating, as if it recognizes the same calm attention that has always guided these journeys. As you settle into rest, the ground beneath you feels solid, the sounds around you steady and reassuring. The harbor breathes quietly, ships rocking gently at their moorings, lines creaking softly as they adjust to tide and wind. You sense how these places, scattered along distant shores, are connected not by domination or spectacle, but by repetition. The same repairs, the same meals, the same evening rituals anchor each arrival, turning unfamiliar land into something that feels lived in almost immediately. In this way, distance loses its sharpness. New harbors become extensions rather than destinations, places where life continues with only slight variation. You drift into sleep with the understanding that home is not defined by where you begin or end, but by the routines you carry with you, unfolding calmly beneath whatever sky happens to stretch overhead. As the routines of the harbor loosen their hold on the evening, you wander a little farther from the water, following paths that rise gently and then level out beneath the open sky. The sounds of work fade into something softer, replaced by the low murmur of wind moving through cloth and leaves, by footsteps that no longer carry purpose but habit. Here, spaces open without becoming empty. Courtyards appear between buildings, small clearings where stone meets earth, where the sky feels closer than the walls. You slow naturally, not because anything asks you to stop, but because the pace of the place seems to settle into your breath. Near one of these open spaces, a modest arrangement of stone rests against a wall. It is not elevated or marked by grandeur. No carvings announce its meaning. A shallow bowl sits at its base, smoothed by use, its surface dulled by ash and time. A faint scent of burned resin lingers in the air, subtle and grounding. Someone has placed a small offering there, perhaps grain, perhaps oil, left without ceremony. You sense that this gesture was made quietly, almost absent-mindedly, woven into the flow of daily movement rather than set apart from it. You notice how belief here does not interrupt life. It accompanies it. A hand pauses briefly before beginning a task, fingers brushing stone, lips moving too softly to form sound. A glance lifts towards the sky at a particular moment, acknowledging something unseen without demanding response. These acts are brief, unremarkable, easily missed, yet they repeat often enough to shape the rhythm of days, settling into the same spaces as work and rest. Further along, another small shrine appears, this one tucked into a corner where two walls meet. Its surface is darkened by soot, its edges softened by countless touches. A few simple objects rest there, changed occasionally, but never arranged for display. You feel no sense of instruction or expectation. No one stands guard. No one watches to ensure participation. Faith here seems to exist comfortably without witnesses, content to remain personal and understated. The sky above remains wide and unclaimed, stretching uninterrupted over rooftops and courtyards alike. Stars begin to appear as the light thins, their presence accepted with the same calm familiarity as the coming night. You sense how this openness shapes belief, how it resists enclosure or strict boundaries. There are no towering temples drawing attention upward. Instead, meaning spreads outward, settling into daily gestures, into the spaces between actions rather than the actions themselves. You pause near a low altar where a small flame flickers, protected from the breeze by stone arranged thoughtfully around it. The flame does not burn brightly. It does not need to. Its purpose is quiet continuity rather than illumination. Someone has tended it recently, adjusting it just enough to keep it alive through the night. The care feels intimate, almost tender, offered without expectation of reward. Around you, people pass by without slowing, yet none seem unaware of these places. They move around them naturally, leaving space without consciously doing so. Children learn this without being told, stepping aside instinctively, lowering their voices briefly, then continuing on. Respect is not enforced. It is absorbed, learned through repetition and proximity, like the rhythm of waves or the pattern of stars. You sense that the gods here are not distant rulers demanding devotion, nor are they abstract forces entirely removed from human life. They feel present in practical ways, associated with travel, with weather, with protection during long journeys and safe returns. Their presence is acknowledged through care rather than fear, through consistency rather than spectacle. Offerings are made to ensure balance, to maintain harmony, rather than to ask for dominance or favor. As night settles fully, the open spaces take on a deeper stillness. Fires burn low. Voices drop further. The city seems to fold inward gently, holding onto warmth and light without shutting itself away. The shrines remain visible in the dimness, not illuminated deliberately, but never fully lost. You realize how these places serve as quiet anchors, grounding life that moves constantly outward across water and land. You sit for a moment beneath the open sky, feeling how belief here mirrors everything else you have encountered. It travels lightly. It adapts without losing itself. It does not seek to overwhelm or convert. It settles into new places the same way routines do, reshaping itself gently around unfamiliar ground while remaining recognizably the same. Faith becomes something carried rather than imposed, something practiced rather than proclaimed. When you rise again, the night feels complete, whole in a way that requires no explanation. The paths ahead remain clear, guided by starlight and habit alike. As you move onward, you carry with you the sense that beneath these open skies, belief has learned to exist quietly, woven seamlessly into the fabric of daily life, steady and unassuming, content to be felt rather than seen. The quiet that settles over the coast does not arrive suddenly. It slips in gradually, almost politely, blending so well with what already exists that it takes time to notice the difference. You feel it first in the spaces between sounds. The harbor still wakes with the tide. Ropes still creak. Water still laps against wood. But there are longer pauses now. Moments where nothing new joins the rhythm. The air at dawn feels the same on your skin, cool and faintly damp, carrying the familiar smell of salt and smoke. Yet something in it feels thinner, as if fewer voices are traveling through it than before. You walk the shoreline as you always have, feet finding the packed earth without thought. Boats are still pulled down to the water, their hulls resting briefly against stone before sliding into the sea. Hands push and guide them with practiced ease. Nets are laid out nearby, stretched carefully, fingers moving methodically to repair small breaks that would otherwise grow. These gestures have not changed. They do not know how to stop. They continue because they belong to the body as much as to memory. Even as the world beyond the horizon shifts, these movements repeat themselves, steady and reassuring. In the city behind you, ovens are lit before the sun clears the rooftops. Bread rises quietly in warm air, shaped by hands that have learned exactly how much pressure to use. The scent drifts into narrow streets, familiar enough to be almost invisible, yet grounding all the same. Doors open and close, footsteps pass. Life arranges itself into its usual pattern, even as fewer ships arrive from certain directions, even as names once spoken daily now surface less often. The absence does not announce itself. It simply becomes part of the background. You notice that conversations linger more on what is close. Weather, tides, repairs that need attention. There is less talk of distant harbors, fewer references to places once known intimately, not because they no longer exist, but because the routes leading to them feel less certain. Larger powers now occupy those waters, their presence felt even when unseen. You sense this not through fear or urgency, but through adjustment. Ships choose calmer paths. Cargo is divided differently. Silence fills gaps where confident plans once rested. The stone of the city remains unchanged, holding the night's coolness through the morning. Walls still guide the breeze. Courtyards still collect light in the afternoon. Shrines remain tucked into corners, their offerings refreshed quietly, without interruption. Faith does not retreat in the face of change. It continues its soft presence, steady and unassuming, woven into routine rather than tied to fortune. People still pause briefly, still touch stone, still look upward when the sky opens wide above them. As the day unfolds, you see how adaptation happens without ceremony. Fewer sails rise at once. Repairs take longer, not from lack of skill, but from an abundance of care. When resources thin, nothing is wasted. Wood is reused. Rope is mended again and again. Even time is treated as something precious, stretched gently rather than spent. The city does not resist the narrowing of its reach. It adjusts inward, deepening what remains rather than grasping for what is slipping away. You sit near the water as the sun lowers, watching familiar figures move along the shore. Their silhouettes have not changed. They still bend in the same places, still pause to look out across the sea at certain moments. The horizon remains wide, indifferent to human shifts of power. Waves continue their slow repetition, erasing footprints as patiently as ever. The sea does not acknowledge empires. It responds only to wind, moon, and time. At night, the stars emerge as they always have, indifferent to borders drawn elsewhere. Sailors still lift their eyes, tracing patterns they learned long ago. Even if fewer journeys now follow those guides, the knowledge remains, carried quietly, waiting. It does not disappear simply because it is used less often. Like the written symbols pressed into clay, like the habits of trade and belief, it settles into a quieter state, preserved through attention rather than display. You sense that what is fading here is not life itself, but volume. The coast grows softer, less insistent. Its influence spreads no farther than it needs to, yet within that narrowing, continuity holds firm. Children still learn the feel of rope and oar. They still watch bread rise and nets dry. They still absorb rhythms without realizing they are doing so. The world they inherit may be shaped by forces beyond their control, but the foundation beneath their feet remains familiar. As you rest near the harbor's edge, listening to water against stone, you understand that history does not always end with collapse or conquest. Sometimes it thins, disperses, becomes quieter. Voices fade not because they are silenced, but because they choose to speak less loudly. What remains is not absence, but persistence. Boats are still launched. Nets are still mended. Bread is still baked at sunrise. And within these simple continuations, a way of life endures, steady and unbroken, even as the world around it rearranges itself. Night gathers along the shoreline without sound, folding itself gently around land and water until the boundary between them feels less certain. You walk where the sand is cool beneath your feet, firm enough to support you for a moment before yielding again. The air carries the familiar scent of salt and damp stone, softened now by darkness. Somewhere behind you, the city rests, its outlines blurred, its presence felt more than seen. Ahead of you, the sea stretches outward, calm and attentive, its surface broken only by the slow, patient movement of waves. Each step you take leaves a mark that lingers briefly, edges sharp at first, then softened as water reaches up to meet it. The sea erases these impressions without urgency, as if practicing a motion it has always known. You pause to watch this happen, noticing how nothing is truly taken away. The sand remains, the water remains, only the shape changes. The rhythm continues. This quiet repetition feels familiar, echoing movements you have seen everywhere along this coast. Hands smoothing cloth, knots retied, words pressed lightly into clay, roots traced and retraced across open water. The waves speak in low tones, never raising their voices, never falling fully silent. They carry fragments of sound from elsewhere, distant echoes of oars dipping into water, of hulls shifting gently at anchor. You imagine how many ships have touched this same edge of land, arriving without spectacle, leaving without farewell. Their journeys did not carve monuments into the earth. They traced paths instead, lines across water that vanished behind them, even as they shaped everything that followed. You sense how memory works differently here. It does not rise upward in stone or declare itself loudly. It settles into patterns, letters arranged simply, designed to be carried rather than displayed, continue to move through hands and minds far from this shore. Roots once followed by starlight still guide movement, even when ships are fewer, even when names have changed. Rhythms of work and rest, learned long ago, persist quietly in places that no longer remember where they came from. The shoreline curves gently, leading you past rocks smoothed by time, past shallow pools that reflect the night sky in broken pieces. Stars appear scattered across the water's surface, trembling with each small wave. Above you, those same stars hold steady, unchanged, indifferent to the passing of years and empires. You feel how the people who once stood here learned to trust this balance, to read the sky not as decoration, but as guidance, to accept that movement and return were part of the same motion. As you continue along the water's edge, you become aware of how much has endured without needing protection. The alphabet shaped for clarity rather than beauty still underpins countless languages, its simplicity allowing it to slip easily into new forms. The idea of exchange without domination continues in markets far from this coast, where trust remains more valuable than force. Even the quiet respect for routine, for patience, for listening rather than announcing, lingers in ways that are difficult to trace, but easy to feel. The sea lifts and lowers again, its surface dark and reflective. You listen to its steady cadence and recognize it as the same sound that once accompanied early mornings in coastal towns, that rocked ships into motion beneath unfamiliar skies, that softened evenings in distant harbors. It has carried voices away, but it has also carried them forward, reshaping them rather than silencing them. What seems like forgetting is often only transformation. You stop once more, allowing the water to wash over your feet before retreating. The cold is brief, sharp enough to anchor you in the moment, then gone. You think of how many times this motion has been repeated, how many people have stood here without leaving a name behind, yet have still shaped the world in subtle ways. They did not build vast monuments to endure. They built systems meant to move, ideas meant to travel lightly, habits meant to repeat without drawing attention. The night deepens and the shoreline becomes quieter still. The city behind you remains at rest, its lights few and muted. Ahead, the sea continues its work, erasing and reshaping, carrying and returning. You feel no sense of ending here, only of continuation. The story does not close. It disperses, flowing outward through letters still written, roads still followed, rhythms still practiced by people who may never know their origin. As you turn away from the water at last, the sound of the waves follows you briefly, then fades into the background, never fully gone. It remains present, steady and patient, like the influence of those who once lived by its edge. The sea remembers not by holding on, but by moving things forward. And as you carry that understanding with you, the shoreline settles back into darkness, calm and complete, content to let its legacy travel quietly on. You linger a moment longer, letting the sound of the waves settle into the background of your thoughts. The shoreline no longer asks for your attention. It knows you have been listening. The night feels complete now, balanced and unhurried, as if nothing more needs to be added. The sea continues its quiet work, and you are free to let it go on without you watching. Your breathing slows almost without effort. Each inhale carries the cool air in gently, and each exhale releases what remains of the day. The world you have walked through does not disappear. It simply grows softer, like a shoreline seen from farther away, still present, still moving, but no longer asking you to follow. Somewhere, ships continue their calm passages. Letters continue to be written. Routes continue to be traced across water and memory alike. None of it needs to be held tightly. These things endure best when allowed to move on their own, just as the sea has always done. If sleep is already close, you can let it arrive now. There is nothing left to listen for, nothing left to remember. The rhythm beneath everything carries on without effort, steady and reassuring. You are allowed to rest within it. And if you are still awake, that is fine too. You can remain here quietly, standing at the edge of water and thought, letting the last sounds fade naturally. The night does not rush you. It never has. Thank you for walking these shores, for listening, for sharing this quiet time. Wherever you are in the world, whatever hour surrounds you, you are part of this moment now, connected by the same calm rhythm that has always moved between land and sea. It's time to say goodbye, gently, without endings that feel final. The waves will continue long after this moment, and you can return whenever you wish. For now, the shoreline grows still, the night deepens, and you are free to drift onward, carried softly into rest.